Over the last 24 hours, Brazil has reported over 23,000 new coronavirus cases as the outbreak shows no signs of slowing. Thousands of health workers have rallied in cities across France against post-coronavirus reforms. Russia stressed on Tuesday its support for Iran amid tensions over Tehran's nuclear program. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. Over the last 24 hours, Brazil has reported over 600 COVID-19 deaths and more than 23,000 new cases as the outbreak shows no signs of slowing. The latest figures consolidate Brazil as the second worst hit country in the world, both in terms of cases and fatalities, second only to the United States. Over 900,000 cases have now been reported, while the death toll stands at over 44,000. Health experts have warned that the number of cases is likely to hit 1 million in the next couple of days. Despite the huge official numbers, analysts agree that a lack of testing forms part of a government strategy to conceal the real figures. Bolivia's health system has collapsed due to the crisis sparked by the COVID-19 pandemic. According to local media, at least 6 people have died on the streets without receiving medical assistance in the last 10 days in Cochabamba, Beni, Santa Cruz and La Paz. They warn that in these cities, several citizens have been turned away from hospitals which are overwhelmed. In the midst of this situation, provincial authorities have travelled to La Paz to negotiate a solution to their budget requests for the provision of equipment and medicines to face the epidemic. Bolivia has officially reported nearly 20,000 COVID-19 cases and over 600 deaths. And in Honduras, the influx of COVID-19 patients over the past few weeks has put its hospital system on the brink of collapse. Public and private hospitals in Honduras have capacity for 6,500 patients in normal conditions, but 90% of beds are now occupied. This leaves a very small margin to treat COVID-19 patients. Honduras has reported over 9,000 coronavirus cases and more than 300 deaths. 10% of those infected are health professionals that lack the necessary protective equipment. Meanwhile, the government has eased restrictions on some state and private companies. However, as a country where about 70% of the population lives in poverty, complying with the lockdown is difficult as they must go out in search of food. Mexico has agreed with the United States to keep borders closed to non-essential travel until July 21st. The restrictions mean that US citizens and permanent residents who enter Mexico on business or for an emergency can cross the border back into the United States, but foreign visa holders mostly cannot. Mexican officials have set up medical checkpoints at various entry points. Essential cross-border workers like healthcare professionals, airline crews and truck drivers are still permitted to cross. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro chaired a meeting with the National Board of the United Socialist Party of Venezuela on Tuesday to address working guidelines in the face of the parliamentary elections to be held this year. President Maduro recognised the work of the PSUV's National Board, acknowledging its political and ideological commitment and unity. He also stated that the upcoming parliamentary elections are a golden opportunity to renew the Venezuelan National Assembly, which must serve the people and the country. Meanwhile, party Vice President Diosdado Cabello highlighted that sectors of the Venezuelan opposition have tried to gain political control in Venezuela through coups, foreign intervention and political deals with paramilitary groups. Cuba is paying tribute to multi-award-winning dancer, singer and actress Rosita Fornes, who died on June 10th in the United States and whose remains were returned to the island to fulfill her final will of being laid to rest in Cuba. Our correspondent in Havana, Nayara Tardo, brings us the details.
But how can you have another glory in front of you and you haven't even mentioned her?
This is the way the Cuban Revolution leader Fidel Castro recognized Rosa Fornes' talent, the most versatile Cuban artist and the last of the great divas of Latin America. The news of her death was sad for culture and Cuban people.
We Cubans are really very sad at this moment because we lost physically a great artist, charismatic, a great celebrity, Rosita Fornés. She was not only a dancer, but also a singer and a great actress. And she influenced very much all the Cuban artists, the young artists, because she was a very, very, very popular artist. All her art, not only as a singer, as an actress, as a dancer, as a comedian, was really superb. She was unique, and she was also very popular and very Cuban. Her roots are here in this country. Although she traveled all over the world, especially in Mexico, she made more than 10 films. In Cuba, she also did some films, but she was famous all over the world, even in Europe.
Rosalía Palet Bonavia was born in New York. Her parents were from Spain. She adopted the artistic name of Rosita Fornés and was recognized as the artist queen of scenic art. She was a founder of the Cuban television and worked in several dramas, comedies, and musicals. Her charisma and professionalism took her to Europe, the United States, and Latin American scenarios.
Her memory will be also in our hearts, in our feelings, because she contributed not only in her art, but also in her personal qualities, because she was a very communicative person.
She was very successful in Mexico. That's why she was declared for 7 consecutive years as the first vedette of America. In one of the last tributes made of the island, Cubans Fornés thanked the people who remember her as a respectful and extremely humble person.
I have a room full of prizes, trophies, medals, awards of all countries up to the King of Spain, and Cuba, of course. But the biggest recognition I have ever received, and I'm still receiving, is people's love.
The world and Cuba are sad. The island won't say goodbye to its first and last vedette. It says until ever.
One day when they asked me which is the color of Rosita Fornés, I said the color of Rosita Fornés is a rainbow, because she was a rainbow. And although she was blonde and beautiful and splendorous, she was not the Cuban canon of beauty, but still many women in Cuba tried to follow her, because she was also a very beautiful artist.
Nayara Tardo, Telesur, La Habana.
And we have more stories coming up after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. US President Donald Trump signed an executive order on police reform this Tuesday in the midst of widespread criticism that his inflammatory rhetoric has aggravated the country's racial divide. The executive order provides incentives for police departments to increase training on the use of force and to strengthen a national database to track misconduct. It seeks to leverage federal grant money to encourage local departments to take action around a set of national best practices. However, the executive order falls far short of the more sweeping policy changes that activists have called for following the murder of George Floyd and so many other African Americans by the police. The Democratic-led House of Representatives is expected to vote later this month on sweeping legislation put forward by the Congressional Black Caucus to rein in police misconduct. The US city of Atlanta has been the scenario of anti-racism protests in recent days following the killing by police of another black man, Rayshard Brooks, outside a fast food restaurant last Friday. Atlanta's mayor has vowed to change use of force policies in the state.
This is the beginning of a great deal of work that lies ahead of us to make sure that we are doing all that we can do to protect our communities and to follow the principles that were set forth by the Obama-Biden administration on 21st century policing. It's very clear that our police officers are to be guardians and not warriors within our communities. I am signing an administrative order, a series of administrative orders today, calling upon our Chief Operating Officer, Joshua Williams, to coordinate with the Interim Chief of Police, Rodney Bryant, to immediately adopt and implement reforms of the standard operating procedures and work rules of APD concerning their use of force policies.
Thousands of health workers have rallied in cities across France against post-coronavirus reforms. Doctors, paramedics and hospital workers, many dressed in their scrubs, are protesting to demand better pay and more investment in the country's public hospital system. French hospitals struggle to handle a rush of COVID-19 patients after years of cuts. France has reported nearly 30,000 COVID-19 related deaths, the fifth highest death toll worldwide, while the country's hospitals have treated more than 100,000 people with the virus. Spanish healthcare workers and supporters have rallied outside a Madrid hospital to demand better resources amid the coronavirus crisis. Caregivers say they are exhausted and are complaining of staff shortages and a lack of protective equipment to deal with the outbreak. 1/3 of all Spain's cases and deaths have been recorded in the capital, where the health system was on the verge of collapse at the height of the epidemic. Protesters have called for a return to a 35-hour week for ICU nurses and doctors, and for the Madrid region to hire extra staff to deal with the crisis.
Right now, we are not preparing number for a new outbreak because we still have staff on sick leave with COVID, or because of causes indirectly related with COVID, like depression, anxiety, fear. We have a lot of people on sick leave. Right now, we have very young, unexperienced people working. We already said many times that working on an ICU or ER isn't something everyone can do.
It's imperative we get back the 35 hours a week, that they limit the patient ratios per doctor, that we get optimum equipment to work, that we can work properly, that we don't add the stress generated by the lack of equipment to the stress of working with sick people, not knowing if we will have equipment, if we will not have equipment. This uncertainty adds a lot of stress to a job that already entails a lot of anxiety.
A German neo-Nazi went on trial Tuesday for the murder of pro-refugee politician Walter Liebke, a killing that highlighted the growing threat of far-right extremism in the country. Federal prosecutors say the main suspect, 46-year-old Stephen Ernst, was motivated by racism and xenophobia when he allegedly shot Liebke in the head on June 1st, 2019. Ernst has a long criminal record and was known to police as a neo-Nazi sympathizer. He was convicted of an attempted bomb attack on an asylum home in 1993. In 2009, he took part in neo-Nazi clashes targeting a trade union demonstration. New Zealand is no longer coronavirus-free after officials detected 2 new cases, which they said were imported from the United Kingdom. Until Tuesday, the country had gone more than 3 weeks without any new cases and had declared that everyone who had contracted the virus had recovered, aside from 22 people who died.
We have continuously highlighted that New Zealand will have cases of COVID-19, particularly obviously at the border. There are 8 million cases worldwide. We still have New Zealanders returning home. What this does prove is the importance of a rigorous system at our border, of us continuing to be very, very cautious in our management and taking the cautious approach that we have continued to take as a government.
We have had 2 cases. These are 2 women from the same family, one in her 30s, one in her 40s, who recently arrived here from the United Kingdom. They were tested yesterday and the test results came in this morning. Both women arrived in New Zealand together on the 7th of June and stayed in a managed isolation hotel in Auckland and were permitted on compassionate grounds to leave managed isolation to travel to Wellington via private vehicle on 13 June.
And we're taking one last very short break now, so stay with us for more. Welcome back to From the South. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov reiterated support for Iran and noted Russia would resist any attempts to promote an anti-Iranian agenda amid tensions over Tehran's nuclear program. Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif arrived in Moscow on Tuesday for talks with his Russian counterpart amid a dispute over international access to Iranian sites where past nuclear activities may have occurred. The standoff comes as a landmark deal between Iran and world powers reached in 2015 continues to unravel. Lavrov accused the United States of trying to manipulate the United Nations Security Council in order to put further pressure on Iran.
Our commercial and economic relations have been developing vigorously, and all that despite the unilateral sanctions against Iran and the Iranophobia that are being stirred up by the United States of America. If they think the Iranian deal plan is bad, then that's Washington's position. But Washington has no right to punish Iran by gambling with the authority of the UN Security Council.
Romania has decided to extend the state of emergency declared in the country by 30 days because of a spike in coronavirus cases.
As you know, as the pandemic evolves, we had 166 new COVID cases yesterday and 250 today, and a further 10 deaths today. We have 4,500 active cases, so looking at the infection spots, we have decided to extend the alert state by 30 days. However, we are still looking at a third package of relaxation measures.
Hungary's parliament has voted to ask the government to put an end to the state of danger declared due to the coronavirus pandemic. The proposal was unanimously supported by lawmakers. It will now be up to Prime Minister Viktor Orban's government to end the state of danger in place since March, which it is expected to do later this week. Meanwhile, criticism from opposition parties centred on another bill, also approved on Tuesday, which will give the government the right to declare a public health emergency upon the recommendation of the Chief Medical Officer, granting it special powers without the need for parliamentary approval. Authorities in Zimbabwe have expressed their gratitude to Chinese medical experts for their contribution in the fight against COVID-19. A 12-member team of Chinese medical experts arrived in the African nation in May and has provided instructions and training to local medical staff on how to combat the coronavirus. On June 11th, the Chinese government donated a second batch of medical supplies to Zimbabwe amid a spike in the number of cases in recent weeks. Minister of Information Monica Mutsvangwa said Zimbabwe is very lucky to have had the experts in the country.
In our country, we are lucky as Zimbabwe to have had this opportunity to get this team of 12 specialists who were actually in the forefront in China in dealing with COVID-19 pandemic to be in our own country. And certainly we will make use of that advice, suggestions to make sure that we continuously take interventions which will protect the lives of our people in our country.
In South Africa, people gathered at the Hector Peterson Memorial in Johannesburg to lay wreaths in commemoration of Youth Day. June 16th marks the same day in 1976 when black students from various schools in the township of Soweto came together and protested against the Afrikaans Medium Decree as another means to impose apartheid. The Soweto uprising was met with fierce police brutality and schoolboy Hector Peterson was shot and killed. The anniversary of his death is designated Youth Day, when South Africans honour young people.
must recommit ourselves to fight not only the pandemic, to defeat the pandemic in the same way the world defeated the Spanish flu in the early 1920s. In the same way the world came through the Great Depression of 1929. Today we are faced with a new pandemic, with a new trend, and we don't know whether it's a defining moment or it's a start of many shocks and pandemics to come. But we say that celebrating June 16, 44 years later, we must draw strength from the battles and the heroic struggles of young people and defeat this pandemic as well.
It saddens me to say that now many of our young people and many of our people have not yet enjoyed the fruit of the tree that was watered by the blood of martyrs. And never mind even the fruit, they've not even enjoyed, the shade of the tree. Sad enough. And one can also add and say our people and black people are still saying we can't breathe. Our black people are still saying remove, your knee on our neck. Our people are still landless.
And we've come to the end of this news brief, but you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Katrina Goss, and thank you for watching.